Good Saturday morning. Another installment of Accidental Christ. The story of Jesus is told to his uncle. This is chapter 5, and there's a beautiful wilderness painting there by Julianne. Despite the complexities of the conspiracy, Jesus' role at first would be relatively simple. To take advantage of the momentum of expectation caused by John, Jesus would appear publicly before him for baptism. He would pose as a Nazirite. Then, barring complications which might arise owing to the unpredictability of the mad baptizer, Jesus would take over John's disciples and gather new followers along the walk back to Galilee, where a monastic community would spontaneously form at his mother's estate in Cana in Nazareth. More of a compound than a residence, the Cana property originally housed a Roman equestrian training facility. Wise Joseph had acquired it before Jesus was born and converted many of the stables to living quarters for his woodworkers and their families. It was estimated that the facility could comfortably house up to 100 people. The difficult task of transforming John's former followers and the multitude of new devotees into a demo-political presence would be the responsibility of 12 Carmelite monks, handpicked by the abbot. In the plan, they were designated as the beloved disciples. They would serve as Jesus' bodyguards, conduct baptisms, and arrange the myriad details of a tightly choreographed mass movement. A prophetically correct public entry into Jerusalem had been carefully choreographed by Joseph of Ramtha and the committee of elders. They estimated it would take at least 3 years to fatten the flock, as Clopas put it, cultivating Jesus' persona and spiritual credentials. They are our army, he never tired of saying. They are so many, many more than Pilate could easily crush if they ever dreamed one dream. This phase of the plan would require the utmost delicacy. Jesus would be exposed to the intense scrutiny by the leaders of all the sects. He would inevitably be challenged by the Dead Sea Essenes, who passively supported John and who considered the Carmelites fornicators and seekers after smooth things. Jesus would have to fire their imaginations without tempting any of them to prematurely endorse or denounce his ministry. A week before departing Ramtha, Jesus was visited by his mother Mary, who, since Joseph's death 12 years earlier, resided most of the time at the Cana estate. She appeared uneasy as she listened to the particulars of the plan, but was thrilled to learn that her son would soon be staying with her. Word reached Clopas that John had blasphemed before the Pharisees and was arrested and briefly held by Herod's men. He was released with the warning that the next time arrest would mean his death. Nevertheless, he returned directly to Enon and continued to baptize. It was time for Jesus to confront his deranged cousin, steal his disciples, and trigger a chain of events that would make him king of the Jews. Reluctantly, Jesus took leave of his uncle and set out on foot. To ensure that he had the appearance of a wandering holy man, he took only water and avoided the main roads. Traveling instead by wilderness paths north into Samaria, turning east, he skirted the foothills of Mount Gerizim and walked through the rugged country to the flatlands of the Jordan Valley. It took 4 days to reach Enon, on the west side of the river, a few miles east of Scythopolis. As he neared the river, he came upon small groups of men and women who appeared to be lost in reverie. Some sat quietly on the ground, others stood and rocked back and forth in a grotesque dance. Most of them hummed mindlessly or mumbled scraps of scripture. Followers of John, he thought, my future disciples. He rounded a small stand of junipers and found himself confronted by a naked and emaciated figure standing directly in his path. He had never seen such a creature, not even among the dung-eating hermits of Arad. Its filth-caked hair and beard nearly touched its waist, and its skin was so layered with dirt that it was hard to determine its age or race. Only the eyes, which burned like twin coals, testified to a life within the wretched, stinking shell. It held what appeared to be the jawbone of an ass or a horse, and shook it threateningly at Jesus. "They're slain, also shall be cast out, and the stink of their corpses shall come up, and the mountains shall be drenched with their blood." The voice was painfully shrill, but the accent was that of a well-educated man, perhaps even an aristocrat. Jesus sidestepped the old man and continued on his way. Suddenly the back of his head exploded with pain, and he found himself blinded and face down on the sand, fighting for consciousness. As he struggled to get up, he realized that the old man had jumped on him from behind and was beating him with the jawbone. "The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with the blood and with the fatness of lambs and goats and the fat of the kidneys of rams." Weakened from 4 days of fasting, Jesus nonetheless managed to roll over and pin the old man to the ground. Appearing disgustingly delighted at this switch of positions, the mad hermit laughed hysterically and ground his filthy groin against Jesus. "And unicorns shall fall with them, and bullocks with bulls, and the land shall be soaked with their blood, and the soil enriched with their fatness." A crowd of pilgrims rushed to the scene and mumbled their disgust at what appeared to be Jesus' sexual assault of a hermit. His head throbbing with pain, Jesus managed to jump up and stumbled down the path. His babbling victim lay writhing on his back in the dust, thrashing his arms and legs like an overturned scarab. "For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance and the year of recompense for the cause of Zion. All the fat is the Lord's. All the fat is the Lord's. And, and that's Constance's favorite Bible quote. She quotes it to me all the time. These are the disciples I must snatch from John? Jesus thought. The scriptures should never have been placed in the hands of such as these. To exorcise a demon, they would evoke the devil. Jesus began to doubt the wisdom of liberating these fanatics. The pounding in his head soon subsided, and a cool wisp of cool air told Jesus he was nearing the river. The path became crowded with devotees coming for baptism. He wondered if John would recognize him. He quickened his pace and passed a small group of pilgrims. Their hostile reaction made him realize that even though the river was not yet in sight, he was already in line to be baptized. Lustration was an ancient ritual and not limited to Semites. Full body immersion in water not only assured the bodily cleanliness of the worshiper, but also served as a declaration of spiritual renewal, a rebirth. Converts to Judaism in foreign countries had been initiated into the faith by water baptism since the days of Hillel the Great. At home, the Hebrews institutionalized this procedure to an elaborate degree. All who wished to enter the temple had first to cleanse themselves in the water of the mikveh, a ritual well dug next to the exterior wall of the temple. Each worshiper was required to descend the steps of the mikveh and immerse completely. A priest was positioned to assure that even the tips of the worshipper's hair had been submerged. Satisfying himself that the devotee had been properly immersed, the priest shouted, "Kosher!" and awaited the next entrant. The very act of John performing baptism rituals in the River Jordan could easily be interpreted as a heretical slap in the face to the temple establishment. In John's scenario, Israel was the temple. The Holy River was its mikveh. And he, the only priest spiritually qualified to declare its people kosher. Jesus knew that once he had assumed leadership of John's revolution, there would be no turning back. The line snaked its way gradually toward the river from mid-morning to late afternoon before Jesus was in the sight of the baptismal pool. Here the waters of the Jordan flowed almost black with silt and the filthy debris from every town and village along its winding path from the Sea of Galilee. Still, after standing hours in the sun, the water looked inviting. Finally, he saw John standing torso deep in the water. He appeared to be naked, but it was impossible to tell. Thick black hair covered nearly every inch of his body, even his shoulders and back. Devotees approached him in a single line. He mumbled briefly with each one of them before bending them roughly backwards beneath the surface of the muddy waters. Returning them erect, he presented them with a small white river stone, then mumbled something in their ears and sent them on their way. At last, it was Jesus' turn. He unwrapped his dusty outer garment and waded directly toward John, whose eyes were closed in prayer. Jesus stood directly in front of John before their eyes met. John instantly recognized his cousin. His tired face seemed to burst with madness and disbelief. He opened his mouth wide, displaying the most appallingly foul-smelling remains of blackened teeth. "Welcome, cousin. Have you come to save me from myself or just the world?" Jesus spoke so that all standing on the river bank could hear. "I have come to be baptized." He made every effort to maintain eye contact with John, but it was difficult because his feet were slowly sinking into the soft sand, and he was forced to continually shift his weight back and forth as he alternately pulled each foot free. "Listen to you. Straight from your school on the mountain, and you already roar like the Lion of Judah. Perhaps you should baptize me." The last thing in the world Jesus wanted was to enter into a public debate with John. "I have come to be baptized," Jesus said, this time loud enough for even more to hear. John waded close to Jesus and seized his arms. "You are still a little bastard," he hissed. Pulling Jesus close, he put his stinking mouth to his cousin's ear. "It is too late, my bastard lord. The plan is dead. I have killed it. I've promised more than any earthly king could ever deliver. The nation is beyond healing. The victuals rot and stink, and the stink outrages the nostrils of God. The body is dead, cousin, and I only have a moment to save the soul." For a moment, while looking into John's eyes, Jesus believed his words. Surely the plan was madness. It could never succeed. Then his thoughts went blank, as if sucked from his brain by John's gaze. Jesus stood dumb and bewitched, tumbling into the dark pools of his cousin's eyes. Seeing this, the crowd, awaiting baptism, began to speculate excitedly among themselves. "What are they saying? Why is John taking so much time with this Nazarite? Could this be his master? Could this be the moment of our deliverance?" John's face softened. He broke his gaze and kissed Jesus on the cheek. For the first time in his life, Jesus was not afraid of him. "Go back to your school, cousin. Copy the scriptures and bury them safely, or take your mother back to Egypt. Seek the smooth things in the time that remains. The dream has passed. My time is short, and if you set your foot upon this path, they will lead you like a lamb to the altar." "Perhaps," Jesus whispered. But as his wits returned, he knew there was no decision for him to make. The momentum of the plan was too heavy. He could not stop it now any more than he could reverse the flow of the river, which now formed a waving vesica around the two kinsmen. Couldn't John see that? Why was he making it so hard? I'm sorry, John. Let's get it over with. John's eyes narrowed, and he began to pant violently. He grabbed Jesus again by the arms and squeezed them painfully to his side. In one move, he kicked Jesus' feet out from under him and plunged him into the water. The crowd at the water's edge exploded into panic when they realized that John, too, had disappeared beneath the water's surface. Jesus struggled to free himself from John's grip, but it was no use. John sank his knee into his cousin's chest and attempted to knock the air out of his lungs, but Jesus twisted his body and managed a solid kick to John's groin. Free at last, Jesus tried to reach the surface for air, but found himself forced under by John's firm grip on the back of his neck. Water was now in his lungs, and he was completely disoriented and hysterical. Suddenly, he felt himself thrust up through the surface. John shook him like a wet rag. He tried to gasp for air, but for a moment could only manage to cough up great spurts of water. John held his helpless cousin up by his hair before the stunned crowd. Jesus' arms flailed wildly in the air. "Behold!" John's voice thundered across the water. The sky became a riot of birds, frightened from their cool porches by the bellowing prophet. The crowd instantly became silent. Many fell fully prostrate upon their faces. "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world." And we'll take it from there tomorrow. For Sunday school. I hope you're enjoying this. Continue to be good to yourself. Enjoy your weekend. Do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.